Have you ever gone to a restaurant and not finished your plate? Do you know where your food goes?
Has your garden ever had an abundance of tomatoes where you pitch them out your back door?
Is your fridge holding some moldy strawberries on the back shelf?
All these examples connect to a universal issue, food waste.
So let's start with defining the problem. Food waste can be described as food not eaten.
According to the Iowa DNR, the average Iowan wastes 30 pounds of food monthly.
In addition, Iowans send more than 190,000 tons of unopened food to landfills, which is enough to fill a line of dump trucks from Cedar Rapids to Waterloo.
Now that you're aware of the issue, let's ask our answer line specialist, Rachel Sweeney, about methods we can practice at home to help reduce food waste. The best way to prevent food waste is by reducing the surplus of food generated. When we grow our own food, we may not be able to consume it fully before it goes bad. So a great method to utilize food in the future is through food preservation.
How does food preservation reduce food waste?
Great question. Well, food preservation allows you to enjoy foods at a later point in time that normally, when left at room temperature or in your fridge, would spoil after a week or so. So for instance, those tomatoes that are on your countertop may not last more than a week. But if you canned them or dehydrated them, you could enjoy them for up to a year later. This prevents food waste by allowing you to keep the food longer and preventing it from spoiling or becoming unsafe to eat.
All right, thank you. What are some food preservation methods?
So I'm going to talk about 4 different methods of food preservation that you can do at home. The easiest and the most simple method is freezing. And by freezing foods, it's important to note that the microorganisms are not killed, but their growth is stopped because the water in the food is not available for those microbes to grow. Freezing also slows but does not stop enzyme activity. So enzymes are those naturally occurring things in foods that cause changes in the texture, flavor, and color. Now, frozen fruits are generally unaffected by this, but if we freeze vegetables, the enzymes can cause undesirable changes in the color, texture, or flavor. So when you're freezing vegetables, we recommend that you blanch them, which means that you place them in boiling water for a short amount of time, usually 1 to 2 minutes, and then the same amount of time in an ice bath. And that just helps preserve their quality. Also, it's important to note that you freeze the food at a temperature of 0 degrees Fahrenheit as quickly as possible. So this may mean that you need to turn down the temperature of your freezer to maybe being negative 10 degrees or so, so the food will freeze more evenly and uniformly. And again, that helps with quality. And then packaging is important. So using moisture-proof, sealable, and oxygen impermeable products to retain quality. So items that are intended for freezing, whether that be bags or containers. The next method of food preservation is dehydrating. And this is the least expensive method of food preservation, and it's actually the oldest method of food preservation. So when we dehydrate the food, it will shrink in size, become lighter in weight because the moisture is removed, and will take up less storage space. These foods also do not require refrigeration, so you don't have the energy costs associated with that. And you'll notice that the food's flavor is concentrated as well as the nutrition because we're removing that water. When you're dehydrating, it's important that you control the temperature and the air circulation to make sure that the food doesn't spoil when you're drying it. So if you have a dehydrating unit, there'll be a fan at the bottom, or if you're dehydrating in your oven, we recommend turning on the fan if there is a convection oven, or putting a fan by the door so it doesn't spoil. The third method of food preservation is canning. And this is when food is placed in a jar and heated to a temperature that destroys microorganisms. And that heat will also inactivate enzymes that lead to spoilage. If done properly, a vacuum seal will form. But it's important to note that a sealed jar is not necessarily a safe jar. So if you put food in there or food products or followed a method that isn't considered safe or research-based and hasn't been tested, just because the jar seal does not mean it's safe. So it's really important that we follow a USDA tested recipe when we're canning. Now, when we're canning, it's important to think about the pH of the food, and the pH is referring to the amount of acid in the food. So high acid foods contain enough acid in them to prevent the growth of Clostridium botulinum, which is a really harmful foodborne illness that can make people really sick and in severe cases can result in death. So we want to avoid that at all costs. So high acid foods include things like fruits, tomatoes that have had acid added to them, and foods that have a large amount of acid in them, like pickles. Whereas contrasting to that, low acid foods have very little acid in them. So this includes things like vegetables, meat and poultry, and combination foods that contain a mixture of high and low acid foods like soup. So for our high acid foods, we can process those in a boiling water bath or a steam canner. There are some time restrictions around the steam canning, but that is an option. Whereas our low acid foods need to be done in a pressure canner for safety reasons. So again, when you're canning, make sure you follow a USDA tested recipe. The National Center for Home Food Preservation has a great website and is a great resource for those tested methods. And then finally, our fourth option for home food preservation is freeze drying. Now this has been around for a while, but for home use, there are some newer units that have just come onto the market within the last 10 years or so, making this something that people can do at home. So when we freeze dry, the product temperatures drop very quickly to -40 degrees Fahrenheit, and then reduce the pressure, and then heat is added to allow the frozen water in the product to change directly to a vapor, and that process is called sublimation. Now, it's important to note, again, that freeze drying does not kill bacteria or other organisms. They remain viable in the food. And they're dormant when when you freeze dry them, but then they'll become active again when you reheat the food for consumption. So it's important to note that those foods still need to be cooked. For instance, if you freeze dry a raw egg, you still need to cook that before you're going to consume the product. So some advantages of freeze drying: it allows you to utilize garden produce at the peak of harvest. You can buy in bulk. So let's say there's a big sale on strawberries, you can go crazy and freeze dry a bunch of them. It's also less expensive than if you purchase commercially frozen freeze-dried foods. They have a very long shelf life and also are compact and lightweight. It is important to note, though, that there's a pretty high initial investment cost as the units start around $2,200 and go up from there. So those are kind of the four options. If you're just getting started, freezing may be a good place to start, and then you can kind of work your way through those more complex options as you build your skills and confidence.
Other recommended methods to help recover surplus of food is to donate to food pantries to distribute to families who could use it. Divert food scraps to feed animals, or learn which food items can be broken down through composting.
A compost bin is a container where you can place organic waste, which will turn into compost over time.
Rachel, what is the first step in starting a compost bin?
Great question. So like you guys had mentioned, composting is where you have a controlled aerobics, meaning oxygen required, environment that converts organic materials into a nutrient-rich soil amendment or mulch. And the end product you get is a compost, so a dark, crumbly, earth-smelling material that can be added onto your garden or other applications. So during composting, microorganisms feed on the material added to your compost pile during the process, and they use carbon and nitrogen to grow and reproduce, water to digest the materials, and oxygen to breathe. Now, there are several different ways to compost at home. So my recommendation or first step is that you read up on these methods and determine which option best fits your situation given your time and space and other considerations. So the first option is backyard composting, where you build a pile or a bin yourself, or you can purchase a bin. Or there's also vermicomposting, also known as worm composting, with a bin. And it's also important to keep in mind that if you don't have a lot of space, let's say maybe you live in town, have a really small apartment, you don't have a yard, you can consider participating in a community-based composting program. So that's where you collect your food scraps, you'll put them in a designated container, and then your community may have a designated location where you drop those off. So for instance, in the city of Ames, their program is called Food Waste Diversion, and residents drop off their food waste rather than it going in the scraps, rather than it going in the trash where it would then end up in the landfill. So look in and see, contact your city hall probably would be the best place to start and see if that's an option if those first two aren't a viable option for you.
And what can be placed in a compost bin?
Good question. So on the left-hand side of the slide here, you'll see items that you can compost at home. They're divided into two different categories. So we have our nitrogen-rich material. Remember, that is what those microorganisms are feeding off of, is nitrogen and carbon. So our nitrogen-rich materials, or greens, include things like food and vegetable scraps, grass clippings, coffee grounds, and paper filters, your paper tea bags without staples, and crushed eggshells. And then our browns include dry leaves, plant stalks and twigs, shredded paper that's not glossy or colored, and shredded brown bags, plain shredded cardboard, so again, no wax coating, tape or glue, and untreated wood chips. And then things that you want to avoid composting at home, bones, dairy products, pet waste, the stickers that you find on your fruits and vegetables, fats and oils, glossy paper, treated or painted wood, weeds or weeds with seeds, so we don't want to have those continue to grow, pest-infested plants. This one was one that kind of surprised me, but the compostable food service ware, that's really designed to be composted at a commercial facility, not in a home setting. So keep that in mind if you're doing it at home. Cooked foods, a small amount is okay, but larger amounts we don't want to compost. And then herbicide-treated plants and dryer lint. And this chart is available on the EPA website, so if you want to reference it, the link is there at the bottom of the slide.
Thank you, Rachel, for sharing your expertise on this subject. Her contact information is in the description of this video. If you have any more questions for her, you can call Answer Line anytime, Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and 1 to 4 p.m.
Now that you are aware of how you can reduce food waste, let's leave you with a few challenges.
1. Practice food preservation at home by freezing, dehydrating, or canning. Check out the National Center for Food Preservation with more details on how to do these things. A link will be in the post.
2. Start a compost bin in your yard. For more details, visit the EPA or United States Environmental Protection Agency when starting a compost bin. Link will also be in the description.
If you complete either of these challenges, fill out the form attached to this post for a chance to earn a free day pass to the Iowa State Fair on Iowa Healthy Living Day, Sunday, August 13th. Deadline to submit is July 31st.
Make sure to visit the 4-H building and participate in some fun activities. Thank you for watching our video.
If you haven't already, tuned into our other team members webinar on food insecurity and how to donate to food pantries. Be cool and check it out.